Instructional Designers in Offices Drinking Coffee is brought to you by Domino, makers of Domino One, the cloud-based authoring tool for e-learning. Learn how your team can work together better at domino.com. Now, here's this week's episode.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday.
Get your dancing chairs on, folks.
Yes,
Paul's saying no music in the chat. Interesting.
What?
Well, if you guys were here, you'd hear the music. Oh, Tashar says he can hear it. That's cool. Gang, we're dealing with a little bit of change because Crowdcast has added some features and new things, etc. And so we're getting used to this new thing. So maybe there's some things that we need to still sort out. But
yeah, Pam and Sarah are dancing with us.
Awesome. That's fabulous.
Tashar can hear it. Yeah, he's dancing.
Phew. So, Paul, maybe do a quick refresh of your browser, maybe. I guess the more important thing is the music is over, but the voices are still here. If that's working for you, then maybe don't break anything after that. So.
And Jennifer says, yeah, maybe having two Brents broke the beat.
That might be, there might be something going on. Yep.
Yeah, wow, crazy. Well, we did get some early weather reports rolling into the chat while we were listening for the audio and stuff to come in. But Chris, what's happening today with what we got going on? Who's our guest today? What's happening?
Well, as was pointed out in the chat, we have two Brents, and I think this is the first time we've had two Brents ever.
I believe so.
On today's show. Yeah, folks, we have Brent Newhall with us here today. Brent, give us your introduction to our gang since it's your first time joining us.
You bet. So hello, everyone. My name is Brent Newhall. Probably I got my start. Well, I'm a software developer by trade. So got a computer science degree back in the early days of, well, we won't go back that far. But then, funny story, after I graduated college, I went to a career fair, and there was a table there for the local adult education. And I went and said, "Are you guys hiring?" They're like, no. Folks just, want to take extra courses after they graduate and so forth. Walked past, and I still don't know why I did it, but I turned around. I remember today, like it was yesterday, came back and said, "Can people sign up to teach classes?" They're like, "Sure, we have the forms for you." So right out of college, I signed up to teach night courses in programming and things like that. I was like, I just got taught how to do these things. I can teach it. So I taught kind of night courses off and on for a long time. Did that, but had a great career as a programmer, doing a whole bunch of different things. Worked for a bunch of different cool companies, Amazon, contractor for NASA, a lot of cool things. But then about 5-6 years ago, I was like, you know what? I think it's time for my next career change. And started looking around and realized, I really have that passion for teaching. I was still teaching off and on nights, basically. I thought maybe it's time to pursue that full time. So took on a couple of different jobs in that area, and now I'm working over at Capital One on a really, really cool program. Working there for a couple of years, and that's been where I've been able to flex a lot of these instructional design muscles and really get kind of deep into a lot of these things based on a lot of that past experience. So that's kind of the high level.
Very cool. And very neat that you just, that little coincidence. I've often sort of semi-sarcastically said that about our industry, it's a space that many of us get into sideways, right?
Yeah.
And my punchline or my joke line often is a career day in high school, there was not a booth for instructional designers or for training, etc. Your experience almost puts the myth to it, but at least I'm glad I can still hold on to the truth of that, because they were selling or offering adult education as opposed to giving you the career officially. And anyway, very cool. And I will mention to our gang here today that Brent, the guest, is not 100%. He's been ill for the last little bit, and he's doing a brave job by joining us here today. So hopefully we can persevere. But if if things don't work out so great, gang, we'll go as far as we can and reschedule a follow-up episode if need be. Brent, the guest, is being a real trooper here today. So. I'm also going to point out, because this is different a little bit, that you're coming to us from your workshop here today.
That is true.
As most people from the home office, but you're in your workshop. And I don't know also that we've had a guest who's actually had a 3D printer in the background before.
Yeah, it's over there somewhere.
Yeah, lots of fun. So it seems that you keep yourself busy.
With projects, perhaps.
Yes. Perhaps, yes, indeed.
So today we are talking about project-based learning. So maybe do you have like a definition of that or a description that you start from when you're talking about this?
So I like to start by looking at assessment in general, right? Like, how do we know if people are learning the thing we're teaching, basically? I think that's kind of one of the fundamental things that I think a lot of folks, instructional design is interesting. And like this field is so interesting because I think a lot of folks come into it and you're generally not designing a program from scratch when you land on your job, right? It's not like, okay, figure everything out from the get-go. You have something already set up that you're updating or whatever. And so the assessments are usually already built in. And there's not a lot of I don't want to say not a lot of thought, but there's not a lot of space to change that. And so that was really where I came in on the program I'm working on, which, full disclosure, so it's a 6-month software development boot camp is basically where I'm working right now. It's where a lot of these lessons kind of came to me. So we bring in folks basically out of college, teach them software development, and then move them into software development careers. So the question is, okay, cool. We sit them down and teach them software development. How do we know if they're actually learning that or not? And originally, one of our main assessments was literally a 50-question quiz. We would give them once at the beginning and once at the end. And I would say, okay, if you got, 10 correct on the first one and then 40 correct on the last one, great. You obviously learned. Really, could you say that, how much does that really prove anything? So for me, project-based assessment means that you are giving your learners a practical project, a practical task to complete that is as close to their, I'm going to say their intended job, for lack of a better term, their intended task at work. And they are graded on how well they complete that task. So it's not simply answering questions, it's doing the work and getting graded on the work itself. And that's one of my big things. I think that's a way more effective way of assessing things.
For sure. Such a, that fidelity to the actual job practice, etc. So let me just check too. I mean, so you've got folks who have graduated from a program, but then they're actually hired and are employees during this 6-month training period. So what kind of, is it just that there's still skill gaps when they're coming out of a program, or is it more that you want to do it, this is our way and we're immersing you into that?
So this is one of the interesting things about software development world. There are so many openings and so few people. We're actually hiring people who did not get computer science or traditional degrees.
Oh, okay.
We're hiring people who got math degrees or history degrees or whatever, but have a passion for tech. They're interested in it. They want to learn programming. And we're like, cool, come on in. We will teach you programming. Like, you obviously have the discipline to complete a 4-year college degree. That's not going to be a problem. So we're just going to kind of give you that next step of learning programming and moving you on from there.
Okay, that's cool. That helps me definitely helps me understand, because in typical circumstances you would presume. So I didn't know if it was more like internal, approaches or something that you were refining. But so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in which case I can understand why people might struggle to get 10 out of 50 on a test coming in.
Well, and this is one of the things is that it's, and in fairness, and I will probably use my current position as both a shining example and also as kind of a how not to do it. And so, please appreciate that. And I say that not in the sense that we were doing things wrong, but in the sense that we learned over time, right?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it's fantastic that you even mentioned that, because a lot of people are so afraid to say that. And I'm always looking for people to talk about their learning opportunities that they've experienced.
And that's the thing. Like, I totally understood coming in that the whole idea of, okay, we have folks coming in, they have no idea about necessarily about programming. Let's give them a quick test to see where they are. And then once they're done, give them a quick test of similar questions to see where they ended up. Like, that totally makes sense. And the idea was it would take them maybe 2 hours total to complete the test along the various things. Quick thing at the beginning, quick thing at the end, whatever. Turns out, you get hired at a job, and the first thing you're told is to take a test to see how well you know the thing that you don't know yet, right? Like, imagine the stress levels in that room. And then 6 months later, you're like, okay, get together, take this one test, and that'll tell us if you got it. And obviously, we had other assessments over the course of the program, but just the stress levels increased, really high. And the more we dug into that, the more we realized this probably isn't like really an effective thing because of all of and we all know about all the issues with standardized testing, that that stress level changes how well people can actually do on the test, all that kind of stuff. So it just wasn't the best way of doing that, even though, again, the folks putting it together, the guy came in and I was like, yep, makes sense, let's do it, cool. But just practically speaking, didn't work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paul's asking a question in the chat. You already know that they don't know, or why else are they in training to a certain degree? But I could see where the logic, though, behind it of saying, okay, this is the difference in knowledge. The way that people use pre and post testing,
right?
One of those strategies being to show change in score, therefore representing change in knowledge or change in understanding
and effectiveness of the training intervention.
Exactly. And we would tell them, on that Monday morning, hey, you can get a 0 on this, and that was fine. Guess what? After 16 years of going through tests that are supposed to tell you how well you're doing, that doesn't matter. Like, they don't actually. It doesn't lower the stress levels at all. So
that doesn't alleviate the stress. What?
Strange. So yeah, and again, like, it's not that it wasn't it did yield useful data points, but that was really our end to realizing those sorts of things. We also have stuff like something that we evolved over time is we would give them asynchronous materials to go through. So if we were teaching them how to write, how to connect to a database, for example, we would have training on that, but then also asynchronous material they could read on the side, and then that would end with a little quiz. And so the idea was you're supposed to complete all of those quizzes at some point. We'd have some broad deadlines for those. Get this chunk done by then, this chunk done by then. And then we started looking at those quizzes and realized, I don't know how effective those are at really getting across how well they've learned those things. That was kind of a lot of the internal look at a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. So give us a sense then of what that 6 months involves in terms of. I'm going to bet it's actually projects, plural, probably instead of singular, right? But give us a sense then of how you what you folks have changed to doing.
Sure, exactly. So what we've done is we kind of went the other direction. Not went the other direction, but we used to give them a little daily assignment. So they would have a little practical task to complete every day. So if you're building web pages, for example, we say, okay, create a table of rows and columns with clothes in them, whatever. And
is that micro project based?
Exactly, a little micro project. And we give that to them at the end of every day. And so classes are done at 3, they have from 3 to 5 to kind of complete that project. And if you got done early, great. And that turned out to be useful, but really time consuming. Because you had to now grade all of those things every day, right? And at the time, we didn't have really any way of automatically grading those. It was literally just hand them out to instructors and have them just grade them and figure it out. We also had a 100-point grading scale for that, which is a whole other thing we can talk about. But anyway, so what we've ended up with is we have weekly projects. So basically, at the end of every week, our learners are given basically a full day to complete one project, and that is a pretty complete application, website, something along those lines. At the beginning, those are obviously much more simple. It is doing a little text-based game, for example, and then as that builds up, it's more building websites, connecting databases, all that kind of good stuff. And so we designed them to be done in about a day, 4 to 8 hours worth of effort, depending on where you are in the program and how far along you are. And then we also have a week-long unit project every month or so throughout the project. So 4 of those throughout the course of the project, course of the program. And so those give us a nice baseline of, okay, now you've got multiple days to work on something, design something from scratch, to really do it on your own. The weekly projects are more specified, so we give them specific requirements. You must do these 12 things. The unit projects are much more build something, and it has to have a database, it has to have a web page, it has to have an interface, it has to have a login. But beyond that, it's up to you, all the features and functionality. So we found those 2 things have given us a really effective kind of approach to seeing a lot of this stuff.
Very cool.
How when you Pam asks a great question in the chat. She says, "How is the on-the-job evaluation managed?" And I'm kind of feeling like I'm late to the table on that. Like you may have already covered it, but
when we say on-the-job evaluation, it's a little complicated because our learners are eventually placed on various teams. They actually go into a rotational programs. They go into several different teams over the course of time as part of our sort of general new software developer program. So basically, they come in, they're given a team, and then after a while, they transition to another team. And so they're given a couple different options. Because of that, we don't have a specific spot that they're like guaranteed to land on. In other words, it's not like you are now going to be building front-end web pages that handle credit card accounts, when you land on your job. So we have to be a lot more generic about that. We can't really say, okay, you are ideal for a particular job. We have to more say you have solid software engineering skills, programming skills for wherever you're going to end up. So we can't really assess what their on-the-job kind of performance is going to be. It's more how well are they learning the material we're teaching them, and then trying to now synchronizing what we're learning with business goals is a whole other interesting conversation.
I was just going to say there's that, and then there's feedback from the managers too, right? Like you trained up this person, you sent them to us, and they're either doing great or they're doing poorly. And I was just wondering, when I read Pam's question, that was where my mind was going, as far as do you get some of that feedback back so you can kind of adjust and everything? Oh, cool.
You absolutely do. And that's always a conversation, because on the one hand, you'll get some folks, people can only see like their team, right? So we'll ask them, what do you want? And they'll say, well, ideally, I want somebody who knows Java inside and out and who can program microcontrollers. And it's like, great, but and they'll say this, but I know not every other team needs that, right? So it's that middle ground between figuring out what are the specific skills and what are the general skills that they're looking for. So that's kind of the general conversation is trying to kind of get that high level view of what are those fundamentals. One of the things we've actually been evolving over time is giving the learners more choice. So now something I pioneered is during that 4th unit, that 4th block, they can choose several different technologies to specialize in. They can say, I want to go into machine learning. I want to go into mobile. I want to go into something else. And so they can kind of specialize that. And that doesn't guarantee they'll end up on a machine learning team the next go around, but at least gives them some place to kind of aim for. And then, the folks taking them in can take that into consideration.
Very cool. Yeah. So Pam asked sort of a follow-up then, and I think a kind of a summary of what you're saying. So individuals are trained as generalists, but then may ultimately land in a role where they acquire or require specialized and more focused skills then after that.
They will certainly land in a role requiring more specialized skills. Yeah. Okay. And in fairness, like that, and these are all internal programs. Everybody recognizes that something coming out of our programs called CODA will need some spin-up time. But then on the other hand, any software developer coming out of a 4-year institution is going to need some spin-up time on the exact things that team is doing. So that's okay. That people understand that.
Yeah.
It's very cool that you guys do that you have that program for employees. I just want to toss that in there as major kudos. We don't often hear about the cool things that corporations are doing as far as training and training up employees. I hear more about people fighting and getting mad that their CEOs or they don't let us do enough training or there aren't enough opportunities, right? We hear a lot of that. It's rare that we hear that there is opportunities inside of large companies like that. So
yeah, it's a very popular program. And I mean, they come in as full, Capital One associates. Like they are full-time employees. They're getting paid to learn. So it's not like, you have to now pay another $100,000 right, or whatever for that training. So it's a nice deal.
Yeah. And does the projects that you guys are working with then, do they also include aspects or teaching people, I guess, basically the other sort of things that wrap around software development, such as, I don't know, agile and sprint cycles or whatever kinds of that project management, that kind of stuff too?
Good question. What we've done with that is we folded that more into those unit projects, those week-long projects. We've had a really difficult time putting those into those individual weekly projects because they're so short, because folks need to be able to focus on one thing at a time, for lack of a better term. And so we found the more we folded into those weekly projects, the more folks got scattered and had a difficult time getting a lot of stuff done. So we try to make sure the weekly project, for example, one of the things we keep reminding our instructors is weekly projects have no optional requirements. Here are the 12 things you need to do those. Often, especially with new instructors, they'll say, well, let's give them some suggestions. Like that just confuses the issue. People get, well, is this really optional? What are they really asking me to do? Does this give me like extra credit? Like, no, just tell them what they need to do. If they want to do more, great. And we will tell them that. Indeed, we have one of the important things about our weekly projects is that we have this system, and I'm still trying to come up with like a pithy name for it, but it's basically simple grades, lots of feedback. So our grading scale is proficient, not proficient. That's it. No A, B, C, D, F, no whatever. It is proficient, non-proficient. You get a chance to resubmit. So if you got a non-proficient, you can fix it and resubmit to get a proficient. But then we also provide a detailed list of here's everything we saw, here's everything you got right, here's everything we would suggest changing, here's some suggestions for the future. I noticed you're doing this. It's okay, but it might be less efficient in the future, all that kind of stuff. And that is actually delivered in a one-on-one meeting with their grader. So they actually sit down every week with their grader to go over the project they previously submitted to get that detailed feedback. In my opinion, that's one of the things we get a lot of programs get sort of backwards on, is they're like, we want to have this really detailed grading scale, but then not provide all those comments because that's work. But that detailed grading scale, it ends up being so arbitrary. I got an 87, he got an 86. What is that? But it's the comments that we found our learners really, really valuable.
And in the case of something like programming, we think of it as somewhat cut and dried, but when you're starting to put complex parts together, etc. And these folks haven't got that background to be able to even know maybe sometimes some of the things that they didn't, they might have achieved something, but here's the efficiencies. That's the crucial learning and the crucial growth there once they've gotten to a certain point, for sure.
Absolutely. And that's one of the interesting things about programming, actually, is that a lot of what you write in code is meant for other people. It's not just meant for the compiler or the computer to run. Somebody else is going to come along 6 months later and add something else to your thing. So a lot of what we're teaching folks is not how to write it correctly. It's how to document it and write it effectively for consumption by other people. So that's a lot of that commentary. But it's not just, it is cut and dried in terms of the functionality, but we have a whole other section of saying, you need to be clear with what you write. You need to indent and space things correctly. You need to leave comments, because otherwise the next person's not going to have any idea what you wrote. So there's a lot of that interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a programmer, but Domino's a software company, and way back I heard it described by someone as you're creating something, but not only just to make it work, but also to make sure that 6 months from now somebody else can fix it or change it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just it makes just so much sense, I guess, in the context of
I think sometimes we
organization.
forget that in our little bubble of instructional design and learning and development. That whole maintenance piece sometimes gets left off. But just talking about the instructional design aspect of it got me thinking too about obviously you're a coder, so you understood what it's like to learn coding or computer programmer, right? And then this is what you go in and you start to train. Is anybody else in the organization come to you and said, wow, because it seems kind of obvious to a certain extent that you want to do projects when you're talking about training for coding and whatnot, right? But are there other content areas within the organization where they're like, hey, maybe we can do the same thing? Do you have any? Can you help us?
We've been talking to other teams about this, and it's interesting because, like, as you say, it's kind of obvious for other things. You get into like HR, and it's like, okay, how exactly?
That's kind of where I was going with
around that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things we do, one of the things I recommend a lot is you can still do scenario-based assessment. You can say, in this situation, what would you do? And leave it more open-ended. It's not a matter of, HR is a good example. It's not a matter of saying, in this situation, this is the correct answer. It's more, in the situation, what are effective paths and what are ineffective paths? What are some things you wouldn't want to do in the situation? What are some things that would help? So it is giving folks that view, and a lot of it is that standard knowledge transfer stuff that we often hear about is, okay, you learned the thing. Can you transfer that to a new domain? Can you to a new situation effectively? There's a great thing from 100 years ago. There was a educator in Europe who was going around to different classes and was asking them about geology, and said, okay, everyone, what is the diameter of the Earth? And they all just stared at him. And this is like 6th grade or something. He said, they should know this. And he goes, no, they know it. All right, what's the diameter of the Earth? Nothing. The diameter of the Earth is what the instructor said. And they all responded. Because they learned that that's how the question is phrased, and that's how you should answer that question, right? And there's so much out there where we learn this sort of stimulus response answer, but not the actual knowledge transfer into the actual domain. So
it's sort of Pavlovian, I think.
Exactly. Yep. And
ring the
100
bell
years ago,
and
we
the
had
kids will answer.
So that's a lot of what I see is figuring out how to get beyond the simple question answer format, even if it's, we're going to rephrase the question, to putting people into situations, even theoretically, even in a question, and then telling them, okay, what are some potential responses there? And it's getting beyond, again, true, false, to more, okay, let's give you 10 different potential responses here, and you tell me what some of the good or bad ones are, so to speak. And then we'll kind of grade based on what that is. And exactly, case studies, as Anonymous is saying. A lot of that is, I think, really...
And it's interesting, too, that you kind of touched on this earlier, the amount of time to do this type of assessment, right? I think this is one of those sort of hidden roadblocks or Oh, I heard a great word for it on a podcast yesterday. The things that slow us, the things that in our head that make us decide to not do the things that we would like to be doing. The resistance, that's the word I'm looking for. Yep. Hard with words this morning, more coffee needed. But yeah, so like, I think we all know that offering up those open-ended solutions and having people present them with a scenario and allow them to communicate back somehow, whether it's in writing or whatever, we all kind of know that that's the best way to assess it, but that requires so much extra time on behalf of the training department or whatever. We want so desperately to automate all of it so we can just push a button, send the course out, they take it, we get data back, and then magically everything is good. They learn, they go on the job. But that's not really the way it works. Do you come up with that sort of resistance, and how do you push through, or how do you get support for the extra resources to do that kind of assessment?
Absolutely. So quick resource, a book called The Distributed Classroom. I don't know if you guys have read this. It's a really good book by some folks who built some, they were inspired by kind of the MOOC model to build something similar at, I think, MIT. And they talk through a lot of the instructional design challenges around providing high quality higher education education at scale while still providing assessment and so forth. And their sort of view is that basically they have automated everything except the grading effectively. Actually, that's not true either. Their approach is basically, they said this is definitely something you do more in programming in other places, is that they have automated all the grading aspects, but they make sure that there is still a one-on-one mentor feature available. So there is still somebody to go over your submission all the time, all the way through. And as they scale up, they add more essentially TAs to that pool to make sure people have that. And they said that is their limiter, is that it's not anything else, it's not the instructor, whatever, it is making sure folks have that option. So that's one of the big things. So to that, what I tell people is basically, I'm going to get a little forceful here. If we're all agreed that the best way to do this is to actually give people, rich one-on-one assessment, we should do that, even if it's not easy. Right? Like if we're all agreed, like I'm not gonna say let's just do it tomorrow, right? Like we're gonna have to figure out how to do that. That's fine. But if the argument is, well, that's not as easy as what I do today, I would argue that's not sufficient, right?
Right.
So, but practically speaking, what I tell folks is this is something you can get to. You can start looking at your materials and say, okay, what would that look like, in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years? How can we get closer to that? How can we restructure things? One of the things we've been working on actually is figuring out how to automate the simple stuff, right? So how can you easily grade the basic things? How can you easily assess that? So, for example, for something math-based, can they provide that to you in a form that you can then plug into software to then, run the actual calculations they do? And then you're still giving them the feedback on that, but a lot of that stuff is automated. So a lot of those kinds of things. In English departments, we're seeing this more and more, where it's like you can run that through a tool to check for basics of grammar and comprehension and so forth and so on, and not have to provide that detailed feedback yourself. You're looking for how well you're making the argument, right? So it's that kind of element, I would say, if that answers the question at all. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I think, I'm going to throw in one thing that you have in your, to your advantage. And that's in your case, the organization has a clear pain, right? And that's getting software developers, and that affects the bottom line, that affects all of those things. So producing those internally, you're not having the same conversations about budget, and I'm not saying you're being written a blank check, but the pain that the organization feels makes a clear case for doing what you're for what you're doing for the organization, where that can be a challenge in some cases. So I'm interested as well. So you guys have been, something was being done one way, and now you're doing something, doing it differently, etc. Let's talk results. What kind of changes or improvements, what kind of data measurements or something have you guys got, for the before and after?
Sure. So we can speak on that in a couple of different ways. One is that we poll our learners a lot. And so one of the things we know a lot is kind of the general stress levels and their general sort of frustrations in general with things. And the first thing we found is that when we dropped that assessment at the beginning and the end, stress levels just dropped throughout the entire program. Everyone's like, thank you. And stress obviously correlates with a lot of different learning outcomes. In general, throughout the organization, what we hear is that our learners remain sort of on par with other software developers coming in from 4-year degrees, and obviously that shifts a little bit up and down over time. But we've been able to maintain that. More importantly, within the program, we are able to identify learners who need assistance much, much, much more quickly. And that's been one of the big things to be able to go back to management to say, we can ensure that the folks who come out of this program have gotten all the support they need, instead of having 98% fine and then 2% are just kind of floundering and, oh, well, maybe it'll all be okay. No, we've identified them and made sure they're either they're okay or they're not okay. We've kind of figured all that out before the end of the program. And so we're not passing them on to those managers for them to deal with. We can kind of deal with that before it goes on to everyone else. So it's that the differentiation, and it's classic instructional thing. What are you actually producing, right? What are your actual requirements? There's usually a huge list of requirements that aren't actually on the requirement list. And so for us, there's a lot of that of saying, yes, you want the software skills, but you also want people who are prompt, people who can communicate in teams, people who can let you know ahead of time if things aren't going well, all that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of things that now with these weekly projects, we can identify these much more quickly, because we're seeing those patterns in those projects. We're seeing, you had a couple of days to complete this and you didn't start until the afternoon of the last day. We can talk about that now partway through the program, instead of that being something that only kind of comes out, so to speak, once they hit their full teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that feedback loop, I think, is probably the most critical part of that process, right? Because typically when you get into the corporate space, it's if you don't do something, if you're given a task and you do it wrong, that's a failure and you get punished. And people kind of freak out about that, right? But when you're given a task as a learning opportunity, and even it could even be a real task, but it just has minimal negative impact if you do something wrong, right? Having that feedback loop so that somebody is there to just, instead of slap your wrist and give you a bad review, they say, oh no, I see, you're learning how to communicate in teams. I see you're mentioning some things that we don't really, that's not really how we use teams to communicate, or whatever, getting some constructive feedback, no matter what sort of environment it's in, I think is something that I always like to push with folks, because we forget that part of the learning, right? It's that, and that it's ongoing, and we need to keep that in the loop.
Absolutely. I want to mention, Jessica asked a question 15 minutes ago. Are you grading using e-learning as well, or is it a separate quiz program? That's just something kind of fun about our program. We've evolved. Like, we use a variety of tools. One of our views is we're very agnostic about the tools we use. So it's a variety of different things, kind of whatever makes sense for us in the time. We're pretty open to that. We have a variety of different things that we use in the program. And I actually recommend folks not get too worried about what tools they have. Leverage whatever tools you do have to make this work. Look for other tools that might be useful. That's great too. But usually, being able to assess people effectively is more a question of process than tool.
And I think that is a fantastic spot for us to tell everybody who actually makes sure that this podcast happens every week. Chris.
Well, gang, speaking of tools, Brent and I are tools. No, wait, Brent and I work for Domino Learning Systems. We do offer an e-learning authoring platform. There's a link below the link below the chat. And as we talk here, I'll throw another link into the chat as well. Also, if you're new to us here, don't hesitate to join us in the LinkedIn group, and Brent will toss a link in for that into the chat. And Brent Newell, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a fabulous conversation. It does seem very appropriate to end up talking about tools, and here you are dialing in from your workshop.
There we go.
It's the full circle experience that we offer here on instructional designers with toolboxes.
Especially being sick, we give you extra major kudos for being here while under the weather. You are a hero.
Yep. Thank you so much for your endurance today. Obviously, we hope you feel better soon.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Hope to come back at some point.
Awesome.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much for doing that. And everybody, thank you for the great chat. Man, oh man, you guys were just rocking it today. We had a fantastic group. It is another Wednesday. We've only got a couple more idiotic left before the holidays. So be sure to save your spot. See you next week. It's out of here. Adios, everybody.